Tell me about your friend who brought over a liver to your house.
Oh, just the other day. Yeah.
From KCRW, this is Here Be Monsters. And this is part 2 of a special 2-part series that we're doing on animal death. Now, if you haven't heard part 1 yet, it's episode 105, and you should be able to find it on your favorite podcast app or over on our website, which is HBMpodcast.com. Now, 2 quick things before we start the show. First, I want to mention that this episode, more so than last episode, is kind of explicit, and I'm thinking specifically in regards to this description that Kryssanne has in this episode about slaughtering animals. Now, she does it in the way that she speaks, which is accurate and beautiful and honestly quite graphic. So I just wanted to give you a heads up on that. The second thing is that we are turning these 2 episodes into a book, and we were hoping to have that ready by now, but it actually just needs a couple more days of work. It looks really amazing, and we can't wait to show it to you. But as soon as we've got it in stock, we'll post about it over on our social media feeds. Okay, here's the show.
Yeah, I have this friend whose parents were Amish, and they taught him how to do everything. So he knows how to cook really well and do all kinds of preservation. He knows how to make his own booze. And he's really good at salvaging roadkill. The other day I was feeling really down, and he sends me a picture of this dead rabbit, and he asks me, "You want to help me process this rabbit?" Half an hour later, he shows up, and he's got a little bag, and inside of it, he's got this rabbit skin that's wrapped around its head. The head is still in there because the brain is really good for tanning. Every animal has exactly the right amount of brain to tan its hide. And aside from the head, the body's already been disposed of. And he's got a little half-pint jar in his other hand that has a liver and a kidney in it. And so I put the rabbit in the freezer for processing on a later date, and I take the little jar of organs and I fry them up on the spot. They're really small. It's just a kidney and a liver, and it's just a snack, basically. It's a really small amount of food. I take a small bite of the liver and then I pass it around. About 3 of my roommates are there, and I have another friend visiting, and everybody just takes a small bite of liver and passes it to the next person. And then when it gets to me, I finish it and I eat the rest, and I feel like we're taking communion together. And in that moment, I feel so much love in the room that this spontaneous gathering just happened out of nowhere. I have a pretty limited experience eating organ meat, though. It's not my number one choice. It's just one of those things where if an animal comes into my life that needs to be eaten or is going to waste, then I'm gonna eat it.
Here Be Monsters, the podcast about...
All you can do is be gentle with them.
The podcast about...
the unknown.
Tell me about the first raccoon that you found on the road.
I'm in my early 20s, maybe 22 or 23. At this point in my life, I'm having a lot of funerals for animals in my backyard because I live with this tabby cat named Irie who is an assassin. Like, he kills every bird, every rabbit, every mouse, every rat, and just leaves it on the porch. I'm leaving the house to go for a walk, and there's a raccoon on the street just laying there in the bike lane. pretty bloated, but it still has its eyes, so I know that it's pretty fresh. And I walk back to my house to get a shovel so I can at least bury it. So I couldn't bear the thought of this raccoon just laying in the bike lane. And I come back with a pair of gloves and I kind of grab it by the tail and pull it onto the shovel. And then I turn around, I'm walking back up the hill to my house, and so I intend to bring it home and put it in the ground and surround it with flowers before I bury it, because that's typically what I do. But this time, I decided to try something else. I was feeling really inspired. My grandpa died last year. I just inherited the skinning knife that belonged to his dad. And I've never used this knife. It's just it's been a display on my altar. And I decide I want to honor this knife for the purpose it was intended. The knife is kind of dull. I don't think to sharpen it, but I work through first a layer of fur, and then I start working through the skin, and then I get to the muscle, and once I get to the muscle, I can start peeling off the skin, which comes really natural to me. It's a delicate process. I think it takes me maybe 4 or 5 hours to get through the whole raccoon. But as I peel the skin off of this raccoon, I can see all of its muscles, and I can see its eyes that are just kind of these little black globes in its face, and I can see all of its teeth. And once I take off its skin and its fur, it starts to look more human to me in its shape and its build. At one point, as I'm working through removing the skin from the legs, I kind of pull on the arm a little bit, and I can feel how muscular it is. I can feel its claws in my hands and how sharp they are. And I get a sense of just how strong its jaws are and how sharp its teeth are. And I'm amazed, because up until this point, I'd always thought raccoons were just really cute and really mischievous, but in getting an up-close and personal biology lesson, I realized that they're actually pretty menacing creatures. And I think it's so beautiful. I talk to the raccoon the whole time I skin it, and I tell it how beautiful it is and how I imagine it's really resourceful and knows where all of the best garbage is, and that he looks so fat and happy and healthy. And I bury the raccoon, and I take the skin, and in maybe 1 to 2 inch intervals, I take my knife and I stab holes in it, and then I thread pieces of paracord through it, and then I put it in the center of this hula hoop that's been laying in the backyard for I don't even know how long. And I pull each point of rope tight, and I cover it in salt, and then I sandwich it in a tarp. I was invited to come to this farm where my friends were living and doing work trade for a while. They need help culling their herd, because the owners of the farm are going through a divorce and phasing out of animal husbandry because they can't work together enough to make it work anymore. And so they've given my friends Sarah and Dirt the responsibility of taking care of them and reaching out to other people to help them take care of them. But I think I can do it. I think I can hold the knife. I've seen a lot of dead things in my life. Maybe I'm approaching it a little too idealistically, but going into it, I'm pretty sure I can hold the knife. So we get there at about 10 or 11, and we meet under this big weeping willow tree. February is kind of a weird time to slaughter animals because I think they've used up a lot of their winter meat by that point. So they were pretty lean by then. When I look at the sheep, I can see their breath. And I could see this look of terror in their eyes, like they knew that today was different than other days. I mean, sheep look pretty scared every time you corner them. Even when you corner them just to flip them over and give them a mani-pedi to prevent hoof rot from taking over, they think they're gonna die then too. They're just very paranoid animals, and all you can do is be gentle with them. So we go straight to the barn to find my friend Dirt, who is rigging up ropes. There's this main rafter that runs across the length of the barn in the area where they keep all of the hay bales. And that's our first job, is that we rig up 4 ropes, which will eventually be the ropes that hold them after they've bled out and died. Nate goes to the corral and selects a sheep randomly. It's whichever one gets close to him first dies first, and they go in that order. He picks up the sheep and he carries it over to us where there's a mesh table, and he puts it down. And he helps me and Sarah hold them down while we tie their feet together. I tie her front legs together with baling wire. And I don't know how to tie knots very well, so I just loop the wire around once around both legs, and then maybe around one leg, and then maybe around the other leg, and maybe around both legs again. And she might get a quick kick in every once in a while, but we've got her. And we're holding her down, and she's looking around, and I can see the reflection of light coming in the barn through her eyes. My friend Sarah is singing to her really softly, mostly humming, just a really gentle, soft humming. We thought that it would be a little bit more kind if we held them while they were dying, so Dirt feels around in her neck for the carotid artery. And on one side, I try to look too, but the wool on her neck is so thick. And I get lost in her eyes, just looking at the reflection of the light coming in from the barn and looking for the reflection of myself in her eyes. And I can just see so much fear, her eyes just darting around the barn, this barn that has been her home for the last year. And I first met her a year ago, and I remember seeing her with her mom in the pen adjacent to the barn. She was only a few weeks old then, and wouldn't have even come up to my knee. She was so tiny when I first met her, and in this year she's grown so much, like about as big as she'll get, and now we have her on her back and we're about to end her life. And Dirt finds the carotid artery and swipes at it with a knife that he just sharpened just to make sure that we'll get it on the first try, because it's not pretty if you don't get it on the first try. Because we try to minimize the fear that these animals will experience, because we know that we're giving them death and that no matter which way you look at it is not pretty. She would kick every once in a while, but after he slices her artery, she kicks wildly and kind of moves around from side to side, kicking as much as she can. But her head leans back all the way off of this table, limply, moving around a little bit, but it's mostly her body that thrashes around at this point. And there's a big plastic tub that I slide under her neck really quickly as soon as dirt slashes her artery. And the blood hits the bottom of the pan like a steady drizzle of water, just pouring into the bottom like a bucket that's gonna get filled up. The blood is so red. It's like the reddest red wine, but it's thicker than that. And it's all over his hands, and it's all over the white wool on her neck. And she kicks and she thrashes, and I can hear her breathing wildly and erratically. We try as hard as we can to avoid cutting the windpipe so that they can at least have their breath to the very end. Because we think that if they can't breathe, then it's a lot scarier than it already is. Because we can't give them much, but breath seems like a gift in a situation like this. And she thrashes for what seems like forever, but her kicks get weaker and weaker, and I'm having to brace my whole body less and less. After she's bled out a little while, it's like all of her strength has melted out of her and just hit the bottom of the bucket. And I can just hear her breath growing weaker and weaker until it just slows, and then it's kind of erratic as to whether or not she's breathing. And then there's one last muscle convulsion where she's stiffer than all the rest, and then she just goes entirely limp. Then there's nothing registering in her eyes, and there's just a steady drip in the pot down below. And then Dirt and Sarah say thank you. We share a silence, and we continue to hold the body, and eventually our hands soften and we let her go, and then she's motionless, just laying on the table. No more fighting for air, and she's just there. She's just laying there. We string her up, and we take a break, maybe pace around the barn a little bit, maybe smoke a cigarette, and then we round up a second sheep. Nobody talks. Nobody wants to be doing this. It just has to be done. I have this friend who invited me to go to a cacao ceremony, which entails drinking a really strong mixture of, it's basically like hot chocolate, but it's cacao. And I find myself sitting in the center of a dark room and there's calming music playing, and we drink the chocolate and we lay down. And my friend encourages us to go into our own heads and look into our imaginations and just kind of see what we find in there. And he'll come around and poke various pressure points on us and try to relax us further. And he blows snuff tobacco up my nose, first in one nostril, and I cough and my eyes water. And then as soon as I'm ready, he blows it up my other nostril, and then I vomit immediately before I can even warn him to get out of the way. But luckily there's a bowl between my knees for such a thing, and I lay down on a blanket. I see flashing colors when I close my eyes, and I start to let my mind drift off. I walk into my childhood home and I see myself as a kid, maybe 3, 4, curled up on the floor, just laying there. I was laying in the middle of my hallway in my childhood home, outside of my room, just kind of curled up. And I think about this pain in my stomach I used to feel sometimes when I was a kid. I speculate that maybe it wasn't a digestive issue, that maybe it was some sort of compounding of guilt and shame, maybe hoping someone would notice me and ask me about it. And I pick myself up and I start to carry myself out of the house, down the squeaky front steps and through the gate, gingerly over the barbed wire fence that leads to the ditch. Then I carry myself up onto the railroad tracks. Her face is, it's so innocent. It's a perfect split between my mom and my dad, like almond-shaped brown eyes and got pigtails kind of sticking up. And I keep carrying myself down the railroad tracks. My adult self tries to look my childhood self in the eyes, and she won't look at me, but I keep carrying her along. And as I go, I gather plants and I tell her what they're used for, and I give her a couple little pieces of a pussy willow branch, some soft mullein leaves, some bachelor buttons. And we go to the sand pits, and I take her to this young ponderosa pine tree that's maybe only like 10 years old, not very tall yet. And I sit her down on a lower branch. I arrange some bones on the ground in front of her. I think there's some jaw bones and some rib bones, and I arrange it into some symmetrical pattern. And I just keep talking to her and validating her, and I tell myself that I'm worth the space that I take up, and that someday I'll find a place that really does feel like home. So many angels all around me. And then my child self looks me in the eye and is willing to hold that eye contact. So many angels. And then I just kind of float away out of the scene. while never breaking eye contact with my childhood self. And I come back into my body laying on the floor, and I can feel tears running down the corner of my eyes, and I think about how the greatest expression of love I've ever felt is being a little person and having someone who loves you carry you to the next place that you'll be. The best I can do for myself is be carrying me where I need to go, or at least trying.
Carrying yourself to the next place you need to be.
Mm-hmm.
That's a lot of something, Chris.
Mm-hmm.
I really appreciate you sharing. It's no small feat. 2 hours and 11 minutes.
Whoa. Dang.
Kryssanne Adams lives and works and writes in Bellingham, Washington. And the book that we're working on together will be available soon. It's short and it's beautiful, and it has some nice pictures in it that aren't available on our website or anywhere else for that matter. One of the things that has been really exciting me about working on this book, though, is that as we've been putting it together, Kryssanne has been putting in more moments of context into some of these stories. You know, in any episode that we make, there's always a lot of cutting room floor tape, and oftentimes a lot of that cutting room floor tape is actually really good, but for whatever reason, it just doesn't fit into the flow of the piece, or it's said in the wrong tense, or there's sound issues, you know. And one of the fun things about working in print again is that you can take those cutting room floor moments and you can work them back in. We think that if you like these episodes, you're going to really like this book. And if you really like this book, maybe it's something we'll do more often in the future. Again, we'll have this ready really soon, and we'll let you know about it first over on our Facebook, our Instagram, and our Twitter accounts. This episode was edited by me. My name is Jeff Emtman. I had help, as always, from Bethany Denton. And we owe a big thank you to the Bellingham Alternative Library for letting us use their space to record in. Music on this episode came from The Black Spot and Cerocell. Cerocell is one of our favorite artists. We have probably used Cerocell's music on about half of everything we've ever released. If you like Cerocell's music, consider buying some of it. You can find it at unclassedmedia.com, or you can also find a link on our website, which is hbmpodcast.com. Here Be Monsters is distributed by KCRW. Our senior editor there is Nick White. We get additional support for freelance contributions from KCRW's Independent Producer Project. All right, thanks for listening. More episodes soon.